They handed him an old rifle and smiled politely, assuming he'd miss. And he did. Once. The young instructor whispered, "Let's not waste too much ammo." But on his second shot, the range went silent. No one knew who he was until the base commander stepped forward and said, "That man still holds our longest-standing record. If you believe true skill never fades and some veterans have stories worth hearing, hit subscribe and stay with us." This one's special. The morning air was cool at Fort Ashton, a small army base just outside town. Most days it was quiet, but today the range was buzzing. New recruits were lined up, helmets slightly tilted, rifles shining with fresh oil. They were here for one thing, the quarterly marksmanship test. Off to the side, a rusty Ford pickup rolled up the gravel path. The driver's side opened slowly and an elderly man stepped out. His name was Edward Dawson, though most called him Eddie. He wore an old windbreaker over a faded flannel, and his left boot showed a slight limp. A cloth bag hung from his shoulder, not military issue, just canvas and wear. His grandson, Private Jesse Dawson, jogged over from the line. "Grandpa, you made it," he whispered, eyes bright. Eddie gave a small smile. "Wouldn't miss it, Jesse. Thought I'd watch you boys show off." One of the younger recruits looked over. "Hey, who's the old guy?" Jesse turned. "My grandfather. He used to shoot back in the day." But the boy was already looking away. The instructors barely noticed Eddie at first. One of them, Sergeant Kramer, finally approached with a plastic chair. "You're welcome to watch, sir," he said politely. "Just stay back behind the line, it gets loud." Eddie nodded. "Course." But just before he sat, he opened his canvas bag. Inside was something wrapped in cloth, a long, aged rifle, polished but clearly used. He ran his hand along the barrel like greeting an old friend. No one noticed? Not yet. Sergeant Kramer gave a short laugh when he saw the old rifle in Eddie's hands. "Didn't think folks still used rifles like that," he said, chuckling. "Might be better off hanging that in a museum, sir." Eddie just nodded. "It still works as long as my hands cooperate." Jesse shifted uncomfortably. "He used to shoot back in the day. Pretty good too, right?" Kramer scanned the line. "Well, we've got a spare target at lane 9 if he wants to take a couple shots just for fun." The word fun hung in the air like a joke no one laughed at. Eddie stepped up to lane 9, slower than the others. He adjusted his glasses, then squared his shoulders as best he could. His left knee trembled slightly. A few recruits nearby tried not to stare. One whispered, "Bet he can't even keep the barrel steady." Another snickered, "Might want to call range control for a medic." Eddie heard none of it, or maybe he chose not to. He raised the rifle, closed one eye, and took a deep breath. Then bang! The bullet missed clean. There was a pause, then a few muffled chuckles. Kramer clapped his hands. "Okay, let's not waste too much ammo now." But Eddie's voice cut in calm and quiet. "One more." Kramer turned back, eyebrows raised. "Sir, maybe it's best if," Eddie repeated, leveling his gaze. "One more." His tone wasn't loud, but something about it made everyone pause. Jesse stepped forward. "He's got this." Kramer glanced at the other instructors, then nodded. "All right, one more." Eddie took a moment to steady himself. This time he didn't rush. He ran his thumb across the stock like he was remembering something. Then he adjusted his grip, slow and precise. The wind eased. The others kept talking behind him, but Eddie heard none of it, just the rhythm of his breath. In, out, focus. He raised the rifle again, not trembling now, just still. A calm kind of still. His finger curled over the trigger. Then bang. This time the sound that followed was silence. The shot echoed down the range, slicing through the still air like a whisper with weight. At first no one said anything. Then someone from the back mumbled, "Was that a hit?" Sergeant Kramer squinted down the scope. He didn't move. His jaw tensed. He turned the knob slowly, zooming in as far as it would go. Then he leaned back and stepped away from the scope. His face had gone pale. Private Jesse, nervous now, looked up. "Sarge?" Kramer didn't answer. He just gestured silently for another instructor to take a look. One by one, the instructors passed the spotting scope around. No one laughed this time. No smirks. No side comments. Finally, a younger recruit walked forward and lifted his binoculars. "No way!" A laminated silhouette target flapped lightly in the breeze at the far end of the range. The bullseye was split clean through the center, a tear so exact it looked like a knife had pierced it edge to edge. One shot, dead center perfect. Eddie stood quietly at the line, lowering his rifle like he'd just finished pouring a cup of coffee. His face didn't gloat, no smile, no smugness. He turned to Jesse and said, "That'll do." The recruit with binoculars muttered, "He didn't even brace." Another said, "I didn't think he could even lift that rifle properly." Jesse grinned, pride swelling in his chest. "He doesn't need to brace. He built that stance in '68. Another recruit asked under his breath, "Wait, what did he say his name was?" Sergeant Kramer finally cleared his throat. "Edward Dawson." Suddenly the silence grew heavier. Not awkward, just respectful. A voice from the back said, "You don't think that's Eddie Dawson from Fort Bragg?" Kramer didn't answer because deep down he already knew. A soldier jogged off toward the main office without being asked. Within moments, the base's old personnel logs were being pulled from a computer system that hadn't been touched in years. As for Eddie, he'd already sat down again, carefully setting the rifle back in its canvas sleeve, not to hide it, just to rest. He looked at Jesse and gave a nod, like a man who'd finished something not for himself but for someone else to witness. The others stood there staring at the torn bullseye like it meant something more than a shot, because in that moment, it did. The name Edward Dawson moved like a quiet wave through the crowd. Some shrugged, unfamiliar, but one of the older range officers, Master Sergeant Clayton, graying at the temples and half-retired himself, froze mid-step. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "Dawson, Fort Bragg 83, right?" Kramer nodded. "He said he shot there, yeah. Why?" Clayton didn't answer. Instead, he walked straight to the control building at the edge of the field. Inside, the office was cramped, with old binders, dusty plaques, and a slow-loading computer from 2 decades ago. He typed slowly, one key at a time. "Dawson, Edward." "Search. Match found." He clicked, and there it was. An archived entry with a photo scanned from paper. A younger man, lean and sunburned, stood beside a paper target split exactly through the center. Fort Bragg marksmanship record, 1983, longest-standing bullseye shot in open-range conditions, unbroken. Clayton blinked. The timestamp on the record read July 12, 1983, exactly 40 years ago this week. He walked out slowly, holding a printout in his hand like it weighed 10 pounds. By the time he got back, a black SUV had pulled into the gravel lot, kind with government plates and a flag decal. From it stepped Colonel Daniel Whitmore, the base commander. He didn't say a word at first. He just walked the length of the range until he stood in front of the seated old man. Eddie didn't stand. He just looked up. Colonel Whitmore removed his hat. "Sir," he said quietly, "we keep a plaque inside. It's been hanging above the range office for 40 years. Your name's on it. Some of us read it once a year, but most never knew the man behind it was still alive." Eddie gave a soft nod. "Didn't come here for applause." "I know," Whitmore replied, "but that shot today? It wasn't luck. It was legacy." The recruits stood a little straighter now. The instructor stepped back respectfully. "And Jesse," he looked at his grandfather with a different kind of pride, the kind that comes when you realize your family name means something far beyond what you knew. Eddie placed a hand on Jesse's shoulder. "I trained a lot of soldiers once. Thought maybe it was time to come watch one." Later that afternoon, as the sun settled behind the trees, a few of the younger soldiers gathered in the lounge. Word had already spread around the base. A retired marksman had returned and still hadn't missed. Inside the control office, Jesse sat beside his grandfather, holding the old rifle across his knees. "You never told me," he said softly. Eddie looked out the window. "Wasn't much to tell." Jesse shook his head. "You've had a base record for 40 years, trained half the guys in sniper school. They said you were one of the best to ever walk through Fort Bragg." Eddie gave a quiet shrug. "Records fade. Medals get boxed up. What matters is who you show up for when no one's looking." Jesse opened Eddie's canvas bag again, digging past the cleaning cloth and old earplugs. Beneath it all was a worn leather folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, a faded certificate, and a photograph. It showed a young Eddie Dawson kneeling beside two soldiers, one a young lieutenant named Parker, the other a man in a wheelchair, smiling with half a salute. The headline read, "Army sharpshooter pulls 3 from ambush, refuses medal." "I found this online a few years ago," Jesse admitted, "but I didn't know it was you." Eddie leaned forward, tracing the edge of the photo with his thumb. "Those boys didn't make it home. Only reason I got that article written at all is because Parker survived long enough to tell it." Jesse looked at him carefully. "Why'd you stop shooting?" Eddie sat still for a long time before answering. "Because after that day it stopped feeling like a skill. It started feeling like a burden, so I taught others, stayed behind the line, let the young ones rise." Jesse didn't speak. He just nodded, the kind of nod that says, "I hear you. I see you, I won't forget." Outside, a few recruits stood in a quiet line near the entrance, not for training but to shake his hand. One by one they came through, not with fanfare, just gratitude. No one asked for stories, they just said, "Thank you, sir." And Eddie nodded in return. He never told them about the ambush, the night missions, or the medals that never arrived. He just sat there with a quiet grace that said, "I was never here to be remembered. I just didn't want to be forgotten." The next morning, the shooting range was quiet. No scheduled drills, no shouted commands, just the steady hum of wind moving through the trees. Eddie arrived early, not because he was asked, but because it felt right. He carried nothing but a thermos of coffee and his cap tucked under his arm. At the far end of the range, Jesse stood waiting. Behind him were 4 recruits, the same ones who had chuckled 2 days before. Now they held fresh targets under their arms and looked nervous, not because they feared getting yelled at, but because they didn't want to disappoint. "Private Dawson," Eddie called, "these boys any good?" Jesse smiled. "Better than they were." "Still got room to learn." Eddie nodded. Good. You keep them steady. He stayed back that morning, didn't touch a rifle, didn't give a speech. But every so often Jesse glanced over to make sure he was still watching. And Eddie always was. Later, as the recruits packed up, Sergeant Kramer approached. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I thought you were just someone tagging along. Didn't know I was standing in front of the reason half our training manuals even exist." Eddie shook his hand. "We all start somewhere, Sergeant. What matters is how we finish." Kramer nodded. "Your shot? We framed it, the target. It's going in the main office next to the 1983 plaque." Eddie raised an eyebrow. "Still have that plaque, huh?" Kramer smiled. "We do now." Before he left, Jesse caught up to him. "They're going to talk about you now, the others. You'll be remembered." Eddie sipped from his thermos, then looked over the quiet field. "I'm not worried about being remembered," he said. "I'm just glad someone else knows the story now." He pulled the old cap over his head and walked back to the truck. Jesse stood there a few seconds longer, watching him go. Because sometimes legacies don't need statues or speeches. Sometimes all it takes is one good shot and someone willing to watch it happen. 3 days later, a new frame appeared on the wall inside the range's main office. It hung beside an old plaque that had gathered dust for decades. Inside the frame was the target from Eddie Dawson's second shot, still split, still clean. Below it, a small brass plate read, "Edward Dawson, Fort Bragg, 1983, returned in 2023, still precise, still humble." Most people who walked past didn't notice it at first. But the ones who knew, they paused. In the corner of the office, a retired Marine leaned in close and whispered, "He missed once." Then he reminded us all what discipline really looks like. Outside, Jesse found his grandfather sitting alone on a bench beneath the old flagpole. A gentle breeze moved through the leaves above them. Eddie's cane rested at his side, untouched. In his hands, he held nothing but a folded paper napkin and a fresh cup of black coffee. "You come to shoot again?" Jesse asked. Eddie shook his head. "No, just came to hear it." "To hear what?" He tilted his head toward the field where another group of recruits was lining up at the range, the sound of it all carrying on. They sat together for a while, neither saying much. Because some stories don't need telling twice, and some legacies don't need volume. Just silence, respect, and a bullet that found its mark, even after all those years. If someone in your life ever showed quiet strength, share this story with them. And if you believe dignity never retires, subscribe to Silent Valor Stories.